No alien academy in the galaxy allowed humans into history class without a supervised war counselor, and for good reason. It wasn't about discrimination, prejudice, or arrogance, at least not anymore. The rule was forged in the blood-soaked mistakes of the past, when alien civilizations thought humans could be taught like any other species. They had learned otherwise. The last time they tried, the Syllith Academies of Galactic history invited a delegation of human students to participate in their interstellar curriculum. It was a gesture of peace, of integration. But on the fourth day of lectures, after a detailed analysis of the first Zorak expansion, a human student named Elias Trent calmly asked a question that froze every tentacle, mandible, and neural filament in the room. Why didn't they burn their supply lines and bait their enemies into overextending? He'd said in perfect Syllith dialect. It would have collapsed their flanks in 6 days. Professor Irix, a Syllith historian with 8 centuries of war scholarship, tried to explain the Zorak codes of honor, but Elias merely blinked and answered, "Honor is irrelevant when survival is at stake." That moment was burned into galactic memory because within hours, Elias had drafted a simulated counter-strategy so ruthless, so efficient, that the Academy's war simulators predicted a 99.7% success rate. The simulation ended with the enemy empire not merely defeated but psychologically shattered, their leadership driven to mass suicide under the crushing weight of hopelessness. The next day, half the Syllith students dropped out of history class. Some never returned to school at all. Since then, the Intergalactic Academic Accord passed the Human Supervised Education Act. No human would attend any historical lecture without a certified war counselor present, someone trained to monitor emotional responses, regulate stress, and interrupt any human suggestion that could destabilize the minds of peaceful species. Today, this policy was in full effect at the prestigious Lytherion Academy, located on a floating citadel above the moon of Vexel. The lecture hall gleamed with bioluminescent walls and gravity-neutral seating pods. Students of every species hovered silently, their minds linked to the hollow boards projecting ancient wars and treaties. At the front, Professor Corvex adjusted his mind streamer, preparing to begin the lecture. Inside pod number 74 sat Jonah Reyes, the only human in the room. Beside him floated Counselor Vehl, a 6-eyed Kyrixian with neural dampeners connected to Jonah's chair. Vehl's job wasn't to control Jonah. It was to protect everyone else. "Remember Jonah," Vehl whispered to the neural link. "No unsolicited strategy suggestions today." Jonah nodded, flexing his jaw. He'd heard this before. His mother had told him stories of Earth's history classes, where war was taught in cold, detached terms. Here, war wasn't just studied, it was feared. Professor Corvex began. "Today we examine the Trazari conflicts, 18,400 BC Galactic Standard Time. The Trazari expansion was halted by peaceful sanctions and mutual defense pacts, a historic victory for diplomacy." A student in the front row, a thin-framed Lithian named Rax, raised a tendril. "Professor, wouldn't military confrontation have been more effective?" Corvex stiffened. That path would have led to genocide. The diplomatic route preserved 6 civilizations. Jonah's lips parted, then closed. His heart rate spiked. Vehl's neural sensors vibrated softly. "I can feel your thoughts accelerating," Vehl whispered. "Breathe. Stay present." Jonah tried, but the data flashed across the hollow boards. The Trazari fleet formations, their vulnerable supply chains, the obvious encirclement routes left unused. His mind calculated without permission. He imagined Earth's old generals in the same scenario. Patton, Sun Tzu, Belisarius. They wouldn't have sanctioned the Trazari. They would have shattered them in weeks. Jonah clenched his fists onto the desk. He wanted to say nothing, but the words pushed at his throat. What if the Trazari came back stronger next cycle? He finally asked, voice neutral. The room shifted. Minds turned toward him, not just physically, but psychically, subtly recoiling. Professor Corvex responded carefully. That was a risk, yes. But by choosing diplomacy, we set a precedent for nonviolent solutions. Jonah nodded slowly. And if they hadn't listened? Vehl's neural dampener pulsed again. Jonah's skin tingled. "Hypotheticals are dangerous, Jonah," Vehl whispered. "Do not spiral." But he already was. He saw the numbers. the Trazari rebuilding in secret, exploiting kindness, learning alien weaknesses. He saw a war erupting again decades later, worse than before. Jonah's voice was soft but sharp as a blade. "There's another precedent," he said, almost to himself. "Mercy breeds repeat offenses." A Murai student nearby twitched nervously, feathers bristling. Professor Corvex's translucent skin flushed violet. The Syllith color is stress. "Counselor Vehl," Corvex said, "perhaps your student needs a recess?" Vehl sent a calming wave to the neural tether, but Jonah's mind resisted. He wasn't trying to be threatening. He just couldn't stop seeing the patterns. "This isn't aggression," Jonah whispered. "It's observation." "Observation leads to strategy," Vehl countered. "And strategy leads to destabilization. Do you remember what happened at the Syllith Academy?" Jonah did. Everyone did. He swallowed hard, closing his eyes for a moment. When he opened them, his pulse steadied. "I apologize," he said aloud. "Continue the lecture." The room slowly relaxed. Vehl monitored his brain waves like a hawk, but Jonah kept himself in check until the end of class. As the students prepared to disconnect from the mind stream, a Zeltharese student named KRYSS approached Jonah. "I don't understand humans," KRYSS whispered, voice low to avoid triggering the counselor. "Why do you always see war?" Jonah looked at KRYSS, eyes heavy with something deeper than anger or pride. "Because history isn't about what happened," he said. "It's about what could have happened. We see both." KRYSS blinked. "That's terrifying." Jonah didn't disagree. Later, as they left the lecture hall, Vehl floated beside him in the corridor of swirling light. "You held back today," Vehl said softly. "Barely." "I know." Vehl adjusted the neural tether. "It's not your fault, Jonah. Your species evolved in predator conditions. You learned to anticipate worst-case scenarios because extinction was always a breath away." Jonah nodded. "And what happens if we stop thinking like that?" Vehl paused midair. "Then perhaps you'll finally find peace." Jonah smiled faintly, but his eyes stayed distant. "Or we'll forget how to survive." Vehl had no answer for that. Across the academy, alien students resumed their studies. They reviewed ancient treaties, peace accords, and models of conflict resolution. They studied the past to prevent future wars. But in the quiet corners of his mind, Jonah still ran simulations. He saw the angles no one else did, the ways enemies could exploit peace, the cracks in every alliance, the paths of disaster that others refused to consider.